It's a great pleasure to be chatting with Clive Gardiner, resident of Lagos and a world traveller. And I want to talk to you, Clive, and thank you so much for being here today, about how it is you chose to be in Portugal and the Algarve, because you've travelled around the world. You've had an amazing career working in the music industry. And of course, you came up in my newsfeed yesterday talking about how when you met Dolly Parton, what a lovely person she was. Love to talk to you about that. But you've had an amazing career. You've come here, I think, to semi-retire and be creative, and you've chosen the Algarve in Portugal, of all places to settle in, having been to some amazing places around the world. So let's talk about that. Thank you so much for joining us for the Resident Podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I've never used the R word, the retirement word. I say paused from work.
I said semi so as not to offend you.
No, it's no offence. It's no offence at all. It's just it's a bit, because it wasn't sort of the great plan. Oh, let's pack up work now and go and retire. It just sort of evolved. Unlike many people, it was COVID that changed things and thoughts.
Was Portugal one of a few, or did you just decide, okay, Portugal works, let's go for it?
No, we were looking in Europe, and obviously Portugal came up because of. So you start where you're fishing, don't you? And then you make your menu of, okay, well, if I catch a fish, this is what I'd like to cook. So you make your checklist as a couple, and there's about 50 things that ended up on our list. But I think we know we're adaptable, and we know, because we've lived in other countries before, that there are some things, but not many things, that are a no-go to us. But what is very important for us as a couple was we didn't want to be just stuck in a tourist area. And I know then some people that may not know the Algarve would say, oh, there's a contradiction there, because everybody thinks of the Algarve just of golf courses and Albufeira bar strips and and all that sort of stuff. But actually what was important for us was to find a town with a local community, and tourism is adjacent to it and a part of it, but not everything.
Same where I live. Yeah, absolutely. You can find that sweet spot, can't you?
Well, I think your area, Silver Coast, was obviously a big contender, and it was Silver Coast or certain places only within the Algarve. And Mallika, my wife, is originally from Singapore, and she spent the first 12 years there. And she goes, I'd like a bit more sunshine if possible. So if we found the right town, it could have been anywhere. Mm-hmm. But Lagos felt right for us for many reasons on that checklist. The only one I couldn't get on the checklist was the sea temperature, because it's too nippy for her, being the Atlantic. I think she'd many people think it's Mediterranean, but it's Mediterranean in aspects and climate and food, perhaps.
What other countries did you live in the world?
Well, when I worked for a music company called BMG, which is a big German music company, and I was in a regional office in Hong Kong. Then I was also in Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore. So It was Southeast Asia. And crazy. My job was encouraging those music companies in those areas that had international music, and some of them had local music as well. And to be important in most countries, you've got to have local music.
Yeah.
It was trying to encourage them to do more than music. So it was through format changes. It was the beginning of games, the beginning of
karaoke as well, right? You were involved
video.
With, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. So the reason I got the job was because of karaoke, which is quite hilarious, really. And then one of
a lot of people get fired. A lot of people get fired because of karaoke, not hired.
Well, karaoke and social media have got a lot to answer for,
yes.
I think. But we had some international artists at that time. Westlife became the best sellers in Southeast Asia of all time, beating Michael Jackson and anybody else at their peak. And they would come over, and there would be 30,000 in the stadium and 100,000 outside. It was absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
So yes, during that time, I met some famous music artists. I was lucky enough, those that came out to the Asian region, or I would come over to an international meeting in the States and meet some people there. And they were all a little bit fascinated by somewhere like Indonesia suddenly popping up on a world sales chart. So in the music industry, they use a barometer called platinum albums, golden platinum albums. and that number is adjusted by the country, by the International Trade Association. So in the States, for example, a million sales is a platinum album. These levels change over time, but that was sort of back in that day. In Indonesia, Westlife's first album went 20 times platinum. Their second one went 26 times platinum. I think they got 10 or 12 times platinum in Ireland. So we were doing some really crazy success, and I built a brilliant team. They were, and the companies went on to succeed. They merged with Sony and all those sorts of things. But I suppose my window in Asia, one of my window in that industry, was all through navigating format change and helping people see the possibilities in doing some new things. The downside of that was online came, and then it became piracy, and nobody wanted physical goods anymore. So by the end of the 10 years or so I was out in Asia, then firstly, they don't need a international expert anymore. They need a downsizer, right? So,
yes,
the last job I had in Malaysia was it had to reflect the downturn in the business, which was 80% down across the whole industry. So, then my job becomes, from rapid growth, it becomes downsizing and having to lay people off and all that stuff. And no thanks.
The less attractive part of it, and that took you back to the UK, presumably.
Yeah, that's right.
Where you moved from music into charities. Yeah,
with a little bit in the middle. I went back to the UK. We thought we can get our kids in a stable place in the UK for secondary, because I didn't want to be on 2-year work visas, and with the business that I knew going through so much change, I thought I needed to reinvent myself and transfer some of the skills, because although the music industry, everybody thinks of stars and studios, actually putting a bit of plastic on a shelf and flogging it is the same as any consumer business. There's a lot of transfer. And in fact, it probably moves a little bit faster in terms of marketing, because you're finding tribes for the 3 or 4 months that a release is out. So I then tried to get back in the UK job market, saw that firstly, being from the music industry, it wasn't a great time, but also then being an MD in Malaysia and Indonesia wasn't perhaps what many companies in the UK were thinking was credible. So after learning that lesson and doing some temp work and interims and all that stuff, I went back to study, and I did an executive MBA at Henley with the plan of legitimizing myself, if you like, into the UK market, and wanted to switch in industries. And after that, I got a job as UK MD of Cafe Direct, which is a fair trade coffee and
absolutely remember it. And they worked closely with Oxfam, did they not?
Yeah, they came out of that sort of. They were firstly available in Oxfam shops, and by the time I joined them, they were in many supermarkets, but facing the challenge that the main brands could sort of reinvent themselves every 3 years, and these guys they needed a rebrand, basically. So they needed me to come in and try and help them appeal to the younger audience that was there, but again, tell the story a little bit better about their sustainability. And so I thought, well, I'll be there for a while, and was very happy, that I'd moved out. I certainly didn't think there were many prospects of moving back into music. But then after a while, somebody from a couple of years, a guy from Henley who remembered me from there, wanted to introduce me to Peter Gabriel, the well-known musician. And and he was forming a streaming service in the UK. So this is 2007, 2008. And his mantra was, I want to level the playing field for unknown artists and to give them a platform that they could upload things to, which is easily done. You and I could sing a song now, and we could go online and it would be on Spotify in 5 minutes for 50 quid. But we
not 20 years ago.
Yeah,
not 20
we
years
couldn't do
ago,
that
right?
stuff.
Yeah,
that's right. So Spotify came up about the same time, and they were going for subscribers. Our website was called We7, and we were looking very much at a website available to everybody, funded by advertising. So, it was disruptive in a lot of different ways. But after 5 years, that was bought by Tesco.
Was it really?
Yeah, and so then it was after that chapter that then I thought, okay, well, let's move into the charity sector and help give something back, because there's a lot of charities that needed help, and as I say, a lot were calling transformation what was catch up, really.
Mm-hmm. How incredible! How incredible! I mean, I ask you about all of that because it's really interesting to me that, having traveled the world and been in so many interesting industries, you end up in Portugal. And I don't mean that badly, but you might imagine being in America or staying in the UK to be in touch with these big industries, or being, in the West Indies, having developed an appetite for world travel. What is it about Portugal that attracted you in this way that people might not think? Well, having had such an illustrious career and traveled so many places, how is it that Portugal comes to the top of Clive's list?
Well, I look at it the other way around. I feel blessed to be in Portugal. Portugal is kind of an underdog nation,
right?
As well as music, I love football, and Portugal has increased its influence
Footprint,
over the world of
yes.
football for a long time. And there's something about the perception of the national psyche that I picked up on, which is, having some Portuguese friends in London, is that people are, if I say humble, they don't wear their achievements loudly, but there are many.
Yeah.
They're very creative, and they don't boast about that. And I think the country has undermarketed itself creatively, because there's some brilliant talent here, absolutely brilliant talent, and some fabulous musical talent, but there's talent in the arts. And obviously that the UK had a huge creative boom when it had state sponsorship, in a way, right? Kids in the 80s, like me, we wouldn't pay for university. You could even get a grant to go to university, and it might be a shoestring budget, but it would still allow you, and there's so many bands from that period that owe all their gratitude to that period in life. And when you see some of the creative super centers that have grown since, whether it's Sweden, in the 90s and the 2000s, or whether it's Korea in the last few years, all that comes from a phenomenal investment in culture for kids and education for kids.
Interesting.
So, and it's not by accident. And of course, the other side of that is Portugal hasn't had the resources. It's still, on average income, one of the poorer countries in Europe, and has lent on the EU for so long, which is, when it goes through a currency crisis or something, many things dry up for a few years. It takes longer. And then people can think, well, Portugal is very slow, or, it's moving at its own pace. Well, people need to understand and spend the time to understand a little bit longer why that may be so. And some of it might be chosen behavior, right? Resistance to change, or actually we're quite happy. We don't need lots of spices on our food. We're quite happy.
Yes. Good analogy.
I could say,
yes.
I'm you called me a world traveler. I could say, well, I know lots of places where they put spices on the food and it's lovely. But I'm not going to come to Portugal and say food that's simply done and is beautiful quality is inferior. It's the opposite. I need to understand why.
Yes. But not everybody's blessed with that perspective, are they? This is this is Clive vision, I think we're talking about.
No, maybe. Adaptability is something that's important. But to look at behavior on food, for example, and then see where that characteristic can be found in other things as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love that saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And that's normally applied to humans on an individual basis, but it's got to be true of countries as well, hasn't it? And that modesty, simplicity, quiet pride is through everything, isn't it? We could in the music, in the food culture, and possibly football. I don't know enough about it, but yes, it's a repeating phenomenon for Portugal.
I think so, and I didn't understand as much as I would like to have done, but before I came, but we knew that we would adapt, and that the traits, whether it's the family values in Portugal of you can either look at it as, oh, as a neighbor, it's really hard to make friends with Portuguese people, or, well, actually, isn't it brilliant that people spend their Sundays in an extended social family and friendship group? Isn't it brilliant?
Yes.
Isn't it brilliant that kids, I know I'm speaking generally, but kids seem to retain their childhood a little bit longer?
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
Doesn't mean problems don't exist, of course. But there's a whole society that you can only learn from if you're exposed to it in some way. Now,
absolutely.
We live in the Algarve. We live in Lagos. Lagos was a fishing village, and there are people my age who, when they were growing up, the dads would be out on the boats. A bell would ring. The mum would run to the canning factory, and she would can sardines. So, there were 12 or 15 factories just in this area. There's 30 in Portimao, and that was 1974. The generation that grew up in that, only a small number had education privileges. So, and they're the ones that are still voting now. So you need to. Well, I think it's incumbent upon people that are not just here for a short time to learn bits about where they are, to understand better how to empathize. I think
that's fantastic. So exercise curiosity rather than judgment, and that's perhaps a transferable sentiment in so much of the world at the moment, right?
Well, I think so. I mean, obviously the world's gone a bit loopy, hasn't it? And people don't take 30 seconds before they pass a judgment, and then it's binary as well. So
yes, absolutely.
So that much better than I do, as I've stepped back from working in that melee every day. But we count our blessings. Literally, we count our blessings. One side of Lagos has got a 4-kilometer beach with a boardwalk along the side by some sand dunes, and we often take the dog for a walk in the morning, and we just literally pinch ourselves and say, how blessed are we to be able to live here?
Fantastic.
And the other side then has got cliff beaches, and has got more boardwalks, and we feel very lucky to be able to have the lifestyle that we've got. Actually, there's a guy called Dylan, a South African real estate guy who's up near you.
Yes, I know him.
But he does a podcast which has the most beautiful title, which is called A Simple Life. So what does Portugal represent? A simple life. And simple meaning uncomplicated. Not simple in any way stupid. It's the opposite.
Yes, or negative. Right.
Yeah. So it's actually you, the visitor that's coming in, the immigrant that's coming in. It's not expats. It's an immigrant. And it maybe you're fortunate enough because of where you come from to be an economic immigrant. You can come in, an immigrant with lifestyle choices. Let's say. Rather than the economic immigrant that will work in Portugal for a few years and then perhaps go to another country.
Yes.
So maybe we're fortunate enough to do that, and that's hard for local people to see around them when people are being frozen out, social housing's not being made, and it's easy then to point a finger at somebody, just as the dog whistling goes on in every other country.
Yes, indeed.
But the Algarve didn't have much in the way of industry other than fishing, and the combination of the world economy changing and all those sorts of things meant that was taken away. So there's only tourism, and tourism's a blessing and a curse. There's 500,000 people live in the Algarve residents, and there's just 3 million Brits come in 2 months, in July and August.
Is that right? I didn't realize those were the figures. Wow, how incredible.
It's something like that anyway.
Yeah,
And there'll be 1.5 million Germans, and there's a huge concentration just at that moment in time. And of course, whether people are renting places or in any service industry, that's the one opportunity there is. And like anywhere else, the trend is increasingly up. So a lot of people from the north of Portugal are now finding it harder to come because prices have gone up everywhere, the cost of living stuff, as well as the tourism trends. So
that's intense. It's an intense picture, isn't it? That needs some brilliant brains on it. I mean, how do you feel about, on that note, from what you have learned about, how long have you been here now? Is it 3 or 4 years?
It's 4 years since we moved, yeah. So 5 years since we bought an apartment. Yeah.
Politically, socially, are you positive about how Portugal can address those things?
I think I'm still an apprentice in learning how it works. I mean, certainly, I think because of what we see in other countries, you see, reform in the UK, and then you see the same playbook from Shager here or a couple of the other ones, and then you think, what's happening in the UK is going to happen here. It doesn't kind of work that way. I mean, Shager's stronghold in terms of the last vote is the Algarve, and so then you sort of think, oh, there's a contradiction there, because every day everyone's surrounded by foreigners coming here for short term or long term. But actually, I think it's much more to do with what was there before tourism became so big. And if people are thinking, well, if they're taking my fishing industry has all gone away, that went away decades ago. That's not since COVID or anything, but there's so many changes going on around, so much development going on around. How do I fit into this world?
Well, it's unsettling, isn't it? Deeply unsettling. Yeah.
Especially
and it's global as well, of course.
Especially for older people. I think, the youngsters, we know Portugal's got a brain drain, right? Because there's so many of them leaving. So I think all the macro trends that are happening around the world are there, but they're amplified in Portugal from the perspective of local income, because the average wage is still so low. And if you're working in a tourism industry, obviously your main criteria is where can I stay, right? Whether you're someone that's from here or whether you're someone from the Indian subcontinent or that's come over to there's almost no social housing or service level housing for the 5 hotels that they're going to build just in one town in the next 2 years.
Interesting times, and some smart brains are needed to deal with this, not only here but across the world. As you say, they're macro problems, aren't they, for us human beings at the moment. Coming back to you personally, and reflecting on your creativity, which I know has been very, very important to you. You've been marketing other people's creativity in some of the biggest acts in the world. We will talk about Dolly Parton at some point. You've been making music yourself as well since you were a teenager, I think, and you and I have a shared love of soul, funk, and jazz, which is the genre in which you operate. Has Portugal been a nourishing backdrop for your creativity in that department?
Yeah, I think very much so. So there's been 2 chapters really. So I formed a band at school with my lifelong friend, a guy called Earl Mackenzie, and we formed a band called the Class of 78 and as teenagers, and we gigged for 2 or 3 years. So even when we started at university, we were still gigging, made some demos to no reaction, as is normal. And then decided that we could become a duo, the 2 of us, because we were always writing and playing the songs ourselves anyway. Did a test project, and there was a magazine called Blues and Soul, which I think you might remember. They ran a competition. We got a day in the studio with a record label called Streetwave Records in West Acton, which I think you know.
I do.
The impresario, Morgan Khan, that's in charge of that. And he signed us and released a record. This was 1983. And, it went out. We did Best Disco in Town and Xenon and all these sort of PAs with people like Phil Fearon or Gloria Estefan was coming up at that time. You know, I had this wonderful little adventure for a while. But the other thing that happened in COVID is, as you know, the world's going through all these places, is Earl and I started thinking, well, come on, we've got so many songs that have never seen the light of day properly. Why don't we get back together? So chapter 2, since 2020, we've made 10 singles
Brilliant.
and 1 album since. So chapter 1, 1980s, chapter 2, the 2020s onwards, the band or the duos Mackenzie and Gardiner. I also do some production under a name called Head Stretch, which is the name of my little label. And, you know, to be able to make music and record it to a standard you're happy with and then put it out onto streaming services, that in itself is a huge thing. And
congratulations on that. That's wonderful.
Being in an environment like this allows, you know, those juices to flow when they flow.
I'm so pleased for you. So Mackenzie and Gardiner can be found on streaming services or searchable on the web. And you do a UK, for those people like us that like a bit of soul, funk and jazz, you're doing a radio show for Morgan Khan's company, as it were, or what emanated from Street Sounds and Street Wave. They have a radio station and you do a show on there, right? Looking at some of the big hits of the 80s.
They approached me. So they've got a 24/7 Street Sounds radio, it's called. And they have a mixture of presenters and curators for different types, but it's predominantly 80s soul and funk music. And they approached me, and you know, I've been making a monthly show for them.
Brilliant. Which you do from Portugal.
Yeah. So I mean, as you can see, the music that I'm making is actually made behind me as well, and the radio show that I make is all made here.
What a lifestyle!
So I make it. So in terms of music, I make it, play it, produce it, mix it. Then I send the last stage out, which is called mastering. So there's a studio in London called Dr. Mix that I use, and I send the master out there so that it has a final set of other ears, you know?
Very, very good. But I need to talk to you about your meeting with Dolly Parton, who sadly we lost. It's not just the world of music, is it? She was a figure, a much-loved figure of popular culture. Maybe even bigger than that, like a globally recognized and loved celebrity. What was your experience of meeting Dolly Parton? And it wasn't in the music industry, right? It was when you worked for the RNIB, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was when I was working for the RNIB, and I had a job there, which was, I was head of reading and content services, which RNIB is the UK's biggest sight loss charity. And what amongst the services that they provide for people with vision impairments of different types is they've got a service called Talking Books, which are audio books, which generally get used by elderly people whose eyes don't work as well. As, you know, so it's people that come to sight loss in their later years rather than people that have lived with it throughout their life. And there's also braille libraries for those that have learned the more traditional type and of course, you know, have perhaps had long-term impairments that mean that they've had that formal education to use braille. And so part of my challenge there was how do we make that relevant to a 15-year-old kid who can't see very well, and how do we make sure that they can carry up, that they can keep up? Because the amazing thing about seeing kids with a vision impairment is, it's so, you know, I worked in social media for a lot of time, and you see someone who perhaps can't see very well, but you see them interacting on social media as fast or even faster than someone that's got full sight. You know, it's just incredible. And then you imagine that same person sitting at the back of a class and not being able to follow because they haven't got the book in the right format or whatever. So you know, RNIB's got this jewel called Reading Services that encompasses all that stuff. And part of that is they even have a radio station, 24/7 radio station based in Glasgow. Fantastic. And it was called Insight Radio at that time, then became Connect Radio. And Dolly Parton, one of her big and charitable initiatives is called Imagination Library. And it started in the States. And it's all reflecting on her background where she grew up. She would say dirt poor. So, you know, that's her expression, not mine. But you know, families with no resources, mum and dads with little education, and of course books, reading, what's all that? and she was struck by her dad's experience. Her dad was illiterate, couldn't read or write, and felt that it held him back. It doesn't necessarily need to, but in his case, he felt that it held him back. And so she was thinking about all these mums everywhere, new mums, and they'd never have books for their kids. So she started this little thing, and it was literally dropping on books on doorstops for families in her area, and it grew and it grew and it grew, and then eventually came over to the UK. And part of that service we offered through our RNIB talking book service. So we would have braille books, or we would have audio books aimed at the younger demographic. It could be Harry Potter or whatever was popular at that time, and kids could listen to that on a USB device. And so she was doing some concerts in Liverpool, and I was in contact with Imagination Library, and we were launching our partnership, if you like. And the opportunity came where it was getting to be the millionth book. So she could give the millionth book to a kid in the UK during her concert stop in Liverpool. And we happened to have a 5-year-old kid with visual impairments who could read braille, who would be delighted to receive the book.
Yes.
So that was the sort of the opportunity that I arranged. And then I brought a broadcaster from our Glasgow radio station called Jill Barclay, brilliant presenter. And we sort of blagged an interview because we were told strictly no voice.
Yeah.
She's in between shows, no media schedule, nothing. But the lure of Jill and her guide dog and 5-year-old Dylan, we managed to get a little interview with her, which then we edited to a radio special, and we put it out. And I suppose, coming back to your point on the impressions of Dolly, I mean, firstly, she didn't have to do any of that. And many artists stick to the schedule. It's not on the list. You're not going to do that. So she was warm and accommodating when she didn't need to be. The team around her were, I've been lucky enough to see many people working, and I think her team were so professional, so kind, generous with their time, which they didn't need to be.
Yeah.
And all the moments that were not on camera were the moments that showed you all of that. She's small physically, but just had a huge aura. So it was a true blessing. And it's funny that, yesterday's sad news, the amount of people from my network from that time, it was 2014 that we met her. So, it's going back quite a long time, but so many people are reminded of the day that she helped RNIB by giving the millionth braille book. It was a braille book of Beatrix Potter.
Oh, wonderful.
To 5-year-old Dylan. And just to be part of that, it's nothing to, with the music industry, sometimes you pull things together, or any creative industry, but it's got a commercial aim. Mm-hmm. That's got no commercial aim, right? She doesn't need doesn't need to do that. She could have somebody mail the millionth book out and get a press release, right? She doesn't have to do that. She doesn't have to sit and talk to the kid, talk to the guide dog, and play with the guide dog. Agree to answer some questions, and that's a very rare, special person.
Absolutely. So Jill, Dylan, and you remember that well. And I don't know the guide dog's name, but the dog may well have remembered the scent of Dolly Parton. How amazing! How amazing! Thank you for sharing that with us. And finally, perhaps, feels like we need to do a part 2 at some point, but I think you mentioned music in Portugal in passing. And clearly you have a good ear for music and a love of music, great passion for music. Can you share with us 1 or 2, 3 stars that might not be the big stars, but the people that you've come across here in Portugal? Because I listen to Antena 1 from RTP every morning now, and it's a really good mix of big music, big commercial music, and incredible Portuguese musicians who I'm hearing from the past and making music now. And I completely agree with you. The talent is extraordinary, and you just wish for these folks to have a bigger notoriety, popularity, which is, I think, is becoming increasingly difficult because streaming niches everything, doesn't it? And the exposure is difficult to achieve. But who would you put forward to anyone who's genuinely interested in hearing something a little bit different coming out of Portugal?
Well, the depth of talent is such that it goes across every genre. So you kind of end up going to the genres that you like. So, you know, what I have a working playlist of just Portuguese music that I listen to. And, you know, once a week, once every 2 weeks, I'll dig into Spotify and try and find things on their playlists. And I think, well, I really like this one, or I really like that one. And then try and listen to it. And then I'll go on to Google and see what the lyrics are all about and see.
Yes,
okay,
great way to learn the language, isn't it? And the culture.
Yeah, it hasn't quite.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a great way to understand what the singers are singing about.
Yes.
And actually, many of the lyrics are quite poetic, probably more poetic than the nursery rhyme stuff that's a bit more popular at the moment in the UK. And, you know, I mean, I talked to some of the local musicians here in the Algarve, and they're mainly asked to play covers, you know?
Yes.
So it's much harder for people to develop new music. But there's a lady called Cecilia Pissarro, is in a Lagos band that she runs called the Pissaros. And when you see the versatility that she's got, but it does, you know, so often have to be the same 10, 12 songs in order to get, you know, the bar animated. And
yes,
she was recent, you know, she's got a couple of tracks on Spotify. One's called Gentle Kiss. That's it doesn't get a lot of play, and she doesn't get many opportunities to play it. But when people are given the chance to make their own music, it means such a lot. So there's a lady who lives in the middle of the Algarve, and she's a Brit called Raquel Gracie, and it really is somebody that you need to interview. And she's formed a venture called the Independent Music Academy.
Interesting.
And it's all about bringing new artists that are here to a wider audience and to see how far that can go. So she might have a residential camp for a week, and at the end of it, there'll be a showcase gig, which is called In the Spotlight, and they'll be rotating around different venues in Valdalobo or Villamor or somewhere like that. Where people are not necessarily used to seeing performances of original songs. And if she brings over some, you know, if some of those retreats are filled with new artists coming over from the UK or from Europe, she'll make sure that there's local places available as well.
Very good.
So Cecilia's been performing there, and you know, she's got huge dreams herself, and has invested in music studios here and lots of different peripheral businesses, as well as performing her own stuff herself. So, you know, being around and being inspired by people like that, who, I mean, in Raquel's case, she certainly doesn't have to do it, but alongside developing her own craft, continuing to do that. And she's worked with some such huge stars. She's so generous to try and make sure that some local artists anyway get the chance to come up as well. And, you know, I'm not sure where all of that will go. I know some of the dreams, and some of the dreams are really big. But, you know, it's a tremendous thing to be involved with. You know, I just go along and chat to the newbies from time to time and tell them some of the realities of streaming and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
You know, and try
make them cry. Yes, right.
Stop them jumping over a cliff.
Yeah, somebody's got to tell them. But yes, if only there were more favourable routes for the incredible talent of musicians in this country. I was taken to a Tavira bar on a party weekend, and like you say, the covers are what gets the room rocking. But when you realise how skilled some of the covers bands are, and there's original material dying to get out, isn't there? An incredible, skillful musicianship underneath the cover versions, there's just so much scope and potential for original music from great young original artists to be shared and played in some way. And it's a shame in a way that we do default and resort to bars playing cover bands when there's so much talent and creativity and wonderful songs that could be unleashed.
Yeah, and I think it can change, and it's not going to change everywhere, but there should be a place where people in a location can go and once a month listen to songs they haven't heard before, perhaps played by people that they might have heard before.
Yeah.
Because as a creative spirit, your expression is yours, and not everything that you work on is fit to be played. But but those that are, they're treasures. They're treasures,
yes.
And sharing the treasure is part of the creative experience.
Absolutely. Well, here's to that. And I know you're probably being modest yourself in how you're enabling that. I wish you the best with your label, your music, of course, as well, and your continued simple life, as we were resonating with, as you put it earlier on, from Dylan, Clive. So thank you so much. You've given me a horrific editing job to do, which is the mark of a very interesting interview. So thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you again.
Finishing one thing on Portuguese talent. Just Friday of last week, I went to a performance of Evita in a theatre in Faro.
You did?
Yeah, all in Portuguese.
Wow.
I mean, absolutely wonderful. The lead singers, the female singer, and the guy, they're both quite well known. In fact, the female singer has even appeared on the West End. But just that whole sort of experience, and seeing mainly a Portuguese audience, able to share. This show's, I think, done 80 shows in Lisbon already, but it's going around the country.
That's
doing
wonderful.
2 or 3 Yeah,
and it does. These things do, don't they? And I think foreigners struggle sometimes to understand the quality of programming that's going on in a town near to them. Same in Caldas, near to where I live. There's an amazing auditorium that attracts some incredible talent from all over the world, all over the country, all over Europe, all over the world. And you have to find your way into the marketing and publicity, don't you? Because it's not familiar. It's not the same as where you're from. You're not going to see posters and billboards everywhere. It's in the little pamphlet, and people know it's going to be on. That the locals know in a way that the expats imagine. These great things don't come to this country. They do. You just don't know about them.
Yeah, and in Lagos, for example, it's the town hall. Now, who would think of going to a town hall social media profile to try and find out what events are on in the cultural centre, and you'll see a world-leading flamenco artist for €10. Isn't
that amazing? Isn't that
amazing? So many of our friends say, well, how did you find out about that afterwards? And it's like, well, you got to, understand how it works.
Well, that takes us back to that really amazing insight you gave us about how things being different doesn't mean they're not as good. You just have to understand better, don't you? You have to be curious rather than judgmental, as we were agreeing on, I think, earlier on when we were speaking. So, Clive, on that note, be curious rather than judgmental. It's a great note to leave on, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. All the best to you. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks so much.